Jason Rubin from Naughty Dog.
I consider him one of my best friends in the industry.
I mean, we were friends since we were 12, and we were roommates for like 10 years. I mean, and worked together. It's very much like a brother relationship.
Hello and welcome to the Game Business Show. Today we have our final recording from the Game Business Live for you, and it's a special one. It's with Jason Rubin, the co-founder of Naughty Dog and one of the brains behind Crash Bandicoot. He's had an incredible career, and not just with the famous PlayStation studio. He famously made a last-ditch attempt to save THQ before holding numerous leadership roles at Meta in a bid to grow and establish the VR industry. But more than that, he's clearly a well-regarded legend of the business. In this episode, you'll hear not just from Jason, but Naughty Dog co-founder Andy Gavin, Insomniac founder Ted Price, former PlayStation Studios boss Shuei Yoshida, and long-term collaborators and Meta execs Jason Kay and Mike Duran, plus former THQ product director Kathleen Nichols. It's a really special episode, this one, filled with stories and insight, and I do hope you enjoy it. Here it comes. Please welcome Jason Rubin. Jason, hello. When researching your career, we're quite close, aren't we? When researching...
Yeah, well, there's the shift over here and the closeness.
Yes, it's quite intimate. When researching your career, I found it interesting. There were several points where you sort of moved out of games. There was a special effects company in the 90s. There was Flector after Naughty Dog. What is it about this industry that keeps pulling you back in?
It's touching people and giving people a moment that is special to them. That film does this as well, music does this as well. So I'm not saying the game industry is the only one. But as far as my ability to create, this is the only place where I've found that home. The ability to touch somebody in a way that makes a difference in their life. And to give you an example, I have no tattoos, yet almost, it's gotten down to maybe once a month now, but there was a period where it was almost every day. I get someone DMing me with a tattoo that has one of my characters that they've put on their body. Mm-hmm. And that's powerful to me. And I move out of the industry because I have a short attention span and something else. Well, I have a long attention span, but I shift and something attracts me. And then I kind of look back and I go, no, I want to go back there because that's where you can really make a difference for somebody and really, touch them in a special way. I think that's the reason.
What was your earliest gaming memory?
Well, the earliest gaming memory would have been in the late 70s. It would have been in the arcade. And I remember Pong. I don't know if that's the first one that I actually played. I remember Space Wars when it came out. I don't think I ever played that one in the arcade. But, in the late 70s, gaming was hard to find and incredibly basic. And so the thing that actually got me interested in the industry was Star Wars, the movie in 77, not gaming. And my friends were smacking each other with sticks. They wanted to be Luke Skywalker. I was 7. And I was like, I want to be Lucas, right? And there wasn't that much, because it touched me. He did that thing that I kind of wanted to do, which was put me in another world and have me go, wow, that those minutes that I spent on that was special. And so I wanted to be a video maker. I asked my dad for a movie camera, and I asked him for, I was 7, 8 years old, and VHS back then, video camera was the size of a VHS. There was no way it was happening. So I just asked and asked and asked. And by the time he said yes to something, I had switched to a computer because I convinced him it would help me with school. And that was 13. And so it was video games. It wasn't movies. And 2 years later, we were published.
Well, we're going to take a trip through your career, and It all began when you met a young man called Andy. Here is part 1 of your story.
Okay.
Yeah, we were like 12 and a half, something like that. And we met in Sunday school, I guess this was 82, maybe early 83 or something. And we both had Apple IIs. And in those days, software costs games cost $70 of $1982. It's not like a kid could buy those. So we were all swapping software. if you were trying to make games, you needed to make art and you needed to make the code. And my code was pretty good and my art was terrible. His art was really good and his code was kind of buggy. So we quickly discovered this in like looking at each other's stuff. And we're like, well, why don't we join forces? But we started writing our first professional game when we were 14, and we officially incorporated at 15 in 1985. Our very first game, almost insanely, that we never published, was an attempt to write an Apple II version of Punch-Out!, which was the Nintendo arcade game.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's go!
We didn't really realize about copyrights, so we just like copied the game and wrote our own version. And then later, like Jason's dad, who's an IP lawyer, was like, you can't really do that because they own those characters. We're like, oh. The first one that actually got published was a game called Math Jam. This like quick little cutesy math game, then published ourselves in little baggies with color photos. Then there's the skiing game, Ski Crazed. So we wrote that in, really like 2 or 3 weeks. And then we found this small publisher in Michigan called Vaudeville. They were sort of a mid-level publisher at this period. We sent it to them and they're like, we can publish it for you. And we're like, cool. And so, they did the box and published it and it was in computer stores. We actually did 2 games for them. So we did that one and then we did Dream Zone, which Jason and I designed together, a much more ambitious game. That took us 6 months or something, 8 months. That was a pretty complex adventure game and we published it with them. But we were disappointed that we could go to computer stores and not see it all the time, like 50-50 whether you'd see it. So then Jason and I were like, we had just started the Thinking First, not a sequel, but a new game that eventually became Keith the Thief. We began that. We're like, well, we need a better publisher. Why don't we call EA? So we called EA and sent them a copy of Dream Zone and some notes on the thing we were working on. They're like, oh, that's really cool. We'll give you a contract. They just sent us a contract. And we started making Keith for them. So that was an EA game. So Jason was drawing this comic in maybe 85 or something, of this dog character that was kind of a teenage dog party animal cartoon character that he nicknamed Naughty Dog. He drew on the cover of the comic the dog character in this logo that said Naughty Dog. And we're like, oh, why don't we just use that for the game company? It's a great game. EA had a finite amount of manufacturing capacity for those cartridges. It was X number per month that they could actually make. And we shipped a month before Madden 1, the first Madden did. And Madden cost less to make and was really easy to sell. So they just stopped making more. Apparently there was at least another 60,000 worth of orders sitting, but they just never filled them because they were busy making Maddens.
Well, that was fun. It's good story. Thank you for coming. So Andy went to MIT.
He did.
You went
He's the smart one.
You went to surf, is that right?
I went to Michigan undergrad, and then I went to, ostensibly learn to surf after Michigan undergrad at Newport Beach, but I never got in the water with a surfboard.
Oh, really? Well, how were you feeling coming off? Andy told us how he was feeling, but how were you feeling coming off those EA projects?
Well, every game we made was getting better. There was no question about that. And, development is hard. Developing a game is hard. And you get to the end, and if the market decides it's not good, that's hard for you. But it's fair. The market decided. That's not what happened. Andy mentioned what happened. We sold out in 3 weeks. We got a call. Good news, you sold out. Bad news, we're not reprinting any. And the 60,000 extra copies, now you think 60,000 extra copies. Back then, we're talking early 90s. That was a lot, especially for 2 kids in college. That would have been a lot of money. And the reason EA's made the right decision, Electronic Artists at that time, but they made the right decision was simply it's cheaper to print these other cartridges, and this Madden thing kind of looks like it's going to take off. And so that made sense, but it hurt because we had spent 3 years making this game and people liked it and we had touched them. They wanted to play it, but we couldn't get it to them. So we just quit. And that was basically the cartridge that was forcing us to quit. And then time moved on and things changed. But I went to learn to surf, ended up deciding, look, I can remember that movie game thing we talked about earlier. I'm going to do special effects. It's the same kind of thing as making games, using computers, whatever. And I actually, 6 months later, I had convinced, the movie was called Wolf. It has Jack Nicholson and Michelle Pfeiffer. And I was going to do the transition effect as Jack Nicholson turned into the wolf. And I was about to do that when we got back into the industry. Wow. And the effect sucks in that movie, and I'd like to think I could have done better.
We'll come back to that. Well, let's go back to the beginning. Your father came up a couple of times during my research, whether that's advising you about Punch-Out, you mentioned earlier.
He's the intellectual property attorney that said, you can't do this. You just can't release this Nintendo title. And Andy and I were like, oh, that sucks.
Well, Ted Price, spoke to him. He brought up his support on Insomniac as well. Were your parents particularly encouraging of this career path?
So I was going to show this to my father afterwards, but now it's going to be. So here's the true answer to that. Absolutely and absolutely not at the same time. They bought me a computer at 13 when that was 2.5 months of my father's salary. And that was the last computer my father ever bought, because every computer subsequently, up until the time we sold Naughty Dog, was bought based on the success of my work on that computer. So my parents created this opportunity, and it wasn't a cheap, low-risk thing for them to do. At the same time, they subsequently started taking away the monitor cables from me as a punishment because they thought that was a way that they could get me to clean my room or do whatever they were wanting to do. And the whole time it was kind of like, this game thing is neat, but you're going to be a lawyer, right? I mean, absolutely at the end of this, there's actually law and et cetera, et cetera. So absolutely, fundamentally, my parents gave me the opportunity to sit on this stage today and at the same time tried to take it away from me.
It must have been unusual then to meet someone else who had a computer in Andy.
Very rare. Which is why we ended up sitting in the back of the class we were in together and doing nothing but talking about it. There was no internet. There were very few books to teach you how to do things like programming. If you ran into a problem which you couldn't solve, which quite often happened to two teenagers, you would go to, they were these kind of computer fairs, and you would find someone that looked like Gandalf. They always did, sitting in the back corner, and you would ask the problem. Have you tried that? And it would be useless. And you'd go home and you'd figure it out. And so having someone to talk to about these problems was night and day. And as he said, my programming sucks. So that ski game you saw, I started that. That was me, Andy. And going down the hill, it got slower as you went farther downhill because I didn't know how to fix that. And he's like, what the hell are you doing? You fix that. And we published it.
Yeah. Okay, so fast forward, you're 22 years of age. You've wandered away from games. What or who entices you back?
Yeah, so EA was at the same time as they didn't reprint our game, as I said, it was a good decision financially for them. I don't blame them for them, but the relationship with EA was excellent. And Trip Hawkins and Bing Gordon, who were the two people running the program at the time, they had an affinity for the two youngest kids that were working with EA, both who had to have their father up until a certain point. Fathers or mothers signed their contracts. We were underage. We couldn't do this stuff without parental approval. They had a lot of affinity for us. So they were, I'm sure, as they were making the right business decision, and also sad that this was happening to us. So as soon as Trip Hawkins decided he was going to make the 3DO, he called. And he said, oh, no, you guys got to come back. And we're like, to do that to us again? And he's like, no. CD-ROM, infinite memory, $1 or less per CD. Because the cartridge was $20. That was the problem. They had to get it made in Japan in very few places. CD, anyone could make it. $1 a piece, infinite memory. And we were like, ooh, we're in.
You then made Way of the Warrior, which was a fighting game.
That's right.
Why did you want to make one of those a fighting game?
So Andy and I early in our career, definitely based a lot of our decisions based on the things we were playing that we cared about. And Street Fighter and more importantly, Mortal Kombat at the time were doing really well. And we always had a passion for the content we were making, but we also, and sometimes this isn't the case with developers, we always had a business sensibility. And we were always looking to find a hole in the market and fill it. And it looked pretty clear that Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat were going to come out for the Nintendo and Sega systems that I think it was Nintendo and Sega that existed at the time. But the 3DO probably wouldn't have them because it was this new upstart and it had capabilities that they weren't necessarily So we just decided to make a game that was very similar to those games, but for this hardware that wouldn't have a game, thinking there's got to be a market there. And sure enough, everybody else was making interactive story games with video for the first time, which was one thing that CD empowered. No one wanted those games. They wanted an arcade game at home. And there we were. And we had made it ourselves with our own money.
Yeah, I was going to say, you funded it yourself, didn't you?
We funded it ourselves. At one point during Way of the Warrior, the light bulb went out in my room. I had moved to Boston where Andy was at MIT. And it was this expensive bulb that was $15. So I lived in darkness in my room for the next 6 months. We couldn't afford a green screen, so we had a gray screen, which meant I had to do a lot more work to, it was photo-based stuff. We were broke. We were broke.
Well, you soon won't be. You returned, to recap, you returned to video games of Way of the Warrior.
We returned. Way of the Warrior became a bidding war.
Yes.
Because it was a game and everything else wasn't a game. And we were a developer, not a publisher making something. So 3DO wanted to publish it, and this new company, not new company, but a company new to the game industry, Universal, wanted that to be one of their first games.
Well, shall we move on to part two? It's a bit of a longer one, this one. Here's part two of your story.
We were both pitching Universal Studios on our games at about the same time. And I vaguely recall walking into a bungalow with Al Hastings and Brian Hastings, who are my partners, as Jason Rubin and Andy Gavin were walking out having just presented Way of the Warrior. We were presenting Disruptor, and I think we may have said hi, but several months later, we were actually both working side by side, and that's where we really started to get to know each other.
Round one, fight.
How's that feel? Yeah, baby. Yeah, baby. How's that feel?
Major game win.
So in those early days, it was basically in this tiny little office zone. There was like Jason and I and Mark Cerny and like Ted and Alan Bryan. But basically we got to lunch together every day. And we were making not at all competitive games at that time. So we were just friends.
And I think there was this sense of solidarity for both teams. Since we were small, we were the underdogs fighting against much larger, better funded teams. And as a result, we wanted to help each other. We shared code, we shared builds to test, we went to each other's parties, and we all became good friends.
Crash was formed in this juncture, like literally conceived on the road by Jason and I as we drove to California and we're talking about our next game. And we were like thinking about it in the context of the new docks we had for the Sony PlayStation. And like, when like, well, they don't have any platform game. And we really, really like Donkey Kong Country, which had just come out that year. And we'd always been big, like Mario and so on fans. And so we're like, what about platform, like a character platform game? Like instead of fighting, you attack other characters in these type of games. Like what would that be like in 3D? And we were thinking about how virtual fighting had taken the 2D fighting game and put it in 3D. And then we're like, well, what would that be like for a character game? And if you was Sonic the Hedgehog or Donkey Kong Country or whatever. And so we jokingly kept calling that the Sonic's ass game, because we're like, well, what would Sonic be like if you're in 3D? It would be awesome because we have this roller coaster like thing of the camera moving through, but then you'll be always looking at his back.
Sony Computer Entertainment America saw the game and fell in love. And they struck a deal, publishing deal with Universal Studio. So it was a licensed product from Universal Studio to Sony Computer Entertainment America.
The company announced a price drop to $199 for the PlayStation and a new character-based action game called Crash Bandicoot. Crash is an Australian marsupial dressed in shorts and tennis shoes.
We wanted to create a mega hit. It was our design intention to create a mega hit and to slip into this place that Sony had left vacant for character mascot games for the PlayStation. But the fact that it happened was fairly miraculous. It was by design, but lucky, I guess. Right place, right time. We were the second highest grossing product in the entire 1997 Universal slate after Jurassic Park 2. So it was the only thing that made more money than we did. And we had cost $2.7 million, of which Sony had prepaid them $5 million. So the ROI was like infinite. Universal's had a bunch of people just didn't get games. It was very frustrating. I remember after Crash 2 had shipped, we didn't get any respect on the lot, and they shoved us in this awkward corporate office, in the corporate tower building that was not at all suited to video game development. It didn't even have enough power. We had to go buy extension cords and run them and plug it under the lawyers' desks and draw power back from other circuits in the building just to keep our section of the building running. Yeah, so we got our own space in Santa Monica, which was great.
Hi, I'm Jason Rubin from Naughty Dog. PlayStation Underground's asked me to tell you a little bit about Crash Bandicoot 3 Warped.
It's amazing. The game came out every year, right? The development cycle was like sports game. And the Crash Bandicoot 3, the third game, became the second ever Western game to sell over 1 million units in Japan. And I forgot what was the first game, maybe Tetris. That made Andy and Jason really proud. Crash Bandicoot IP was owned by Universal Studios.
So during Crash 1, it was pretty good, and Mark was there and so on. By the CTR era, Mark had left. Universal sold itself. Matsushita had sold it to Seagram's, the beverage company. And all the management had changed, and they didn't get games at all. And they weren't doing anything on the game, but they were collecting a ton of the money.
And when we was finishing Crash Bandicoot, the racing, and we are looking to move to next generation, PlayStation 2, we felt that we have to break away from that setup.
That's how Jak and Daxter was essentially born. There just wasn't enough room for the parties. At one level, I didn't want to leave him behind. The other level, I was really sick of working 24/7 on exactly the same game. Production costs were going don't. It was $1.6 million for Crash 1, $2 2.5, 2 point something for Crash 2, close to 4 for Crash 3, like 7 or 8 or something for CTR, like because the team size is getting bigger basically. And then with the PlayStation 2 games, it was looking like it was gonna be 15 or 20 million. And Jason and I were like fronting this out of pocket basically in these economics. And then you get it sort of like paid back basically. Like, but it was getting very, very stressful.
During the development of Jak and Daxter, the first game, Jason and Andy suggested that they are open to be acquired by PlayStation. We are like, yes, let's do it.
They had developed an instancing system for their environments that was really clever. And Jason said at one point to me, hey, are you guys interested in checking this out? And I said, yes, absolutely. And so we were able to learn a lot from what they had already done to build these beautiful, expansive environments in Jak and Daxter very efficiently. And we incorporated a lot of those techniques in Ratchet and Clank. I always give Jason credit for this because he was the one who said, hey, let's do this, let's share.
I mean, that's a complex story too. Well, first of all, I was kind of a little burnt out. Jason was definitely burnt out. But we ran it for Sony for 4.5 years after the acquisition, and it was going great, and their integration, it's still great, and it's still very much the same company and so on. But we also there was a new generation of guys like right under us who are like senior management who were like ready really to take over. Like most prominently, Evan Wells, Stephen White, and Christoph Boester. So it was very natural. Like Evan was already Jak 3, like Evan and I co-ran as a production, and he had pretty much run Jak 2 as well as sort of director.
They managed the transition so well. So, as a part of acquisition, they agreed to stay at least, for another 3 games. So we are so happy and grateful that they set up such a, great leader behind them, when they left Naughty Dog.
Wow.
That's a lot of time with a lot going on in that period.
There was a lot.
Back to that, yeah.
We tried to keep that down first. We went through a few iterations of that. It was 20 minutes at one point. I didn't just realize how closely aligned the Naughty Dog and Insomniac stories were. Ted talked extensively about your friendship. He even told us there was a joint GDC talk you did where you had to pretend to be rivals because people expected it. Was there really no Spyro and Crash sort of competitiveness at all?
Well, the way I always looked at it is on the court, competitors to the end. Mm-hmm. Off the court, best friends. Like think about a basketball player and another basketball player on 2 teams who love each other dearly, but when they get on the court, they're trying to win. And that's pretty much how we treated the relationship from the moment we met. And as Andy said, when we met, they were making a shooter. We were making a character action game. It got closer as they started making character action games. And there was space in the industry for 2 of them. There was, always. And so I always looked at it as more happy gamers, more gamers, better for both of us. And yes, the relationship was that close. Off the court, we were going to each other's homes, going out to dinner with each other. We were very close friends. Still are.
Well, yeah, I can tell. Shuei told us that Crash was such a big hit in Japan, as you said, second game to hit 1 million. But it was presented very differently there, wasn't it?
Yeah, it definitely was. Japan is a very special place with a very special culture. And at least back then, and still, foreign things are foreign. And they hadn't really had a character action mascot game, if you will, come in from a foreign country. They were used to Mario, Nintendo, and Sonic with Naka-san had created. And the very concept, first of all, the very concept that 2 people who had made Way of the Warrior would next make Crash Bandicoot, and that would be a mascot for Sony, is insane. But the idea that they would then go on to succeed in Japan, a country that, for the most part, saw things as foreign as otaku, a geeky thing, it was crazy thinking. Beyond almost harder than doing Crash and making it a mascot for Sony was having that work in Japan. I was very aware of this. I spent a lot of time in Japan. I spent a lot of time studying Japan, Japanese culture, the Japanese game industry, what they liked, everything like that, and realized the more I learned, the more I realized I would never understand it. So we asked their marketing teams and others, like, what do we need to do? And there were changes to the character. There were changes to the art. There were changes to the way that the character died, the way that we presented things. There were a lot of changes that we made. And the Japanese version was different. And the marketing was very different. Yeah. And those two things, and I give a lot of credit to Sony Japan, managed to push it over the edge where it was foreign but cool.
I asked Andy this question. You heard his answer there. Was it hard to say goodbye to Crash?
It was extremely hard to say goodbye to Crash. They were being very nice. The relationship with Universal was abysmal. I mean, to give you an idea, at one point, one of the people there put a target that he had gone and shot with real bullets on the wall, went to Andy and said, your partner ought to look at this. I'm not a bad shot about something. It was abysmal. They had us working in a building Andy said was very corporate. He didn't mention that most of our desks were in a hallway. At night, on the 30-some-odd floor, this building is on Universal Studios, the heat would rise, as it does in buildings at night, but they turned the AC off at 6. Our normal hours ended at 4 a.m. That was the Crash Bandicoot hours. So by 4 a.m. on a summer day on the 34th floor, it was over 100 degrees in the building. And I'm not exaggerating. I know that to be a fact because our servers would shut down at about 105. They wouldn't let us bring in air conditioning on our own. They wouldn't put the air conditioning on. So we had to bring in ice and a fan to keep Crash Team Racing going. Now, I want to point out that that game made them well over $100 million in the first few weeks, and that yet they were still doing this with us. So when we talk about a bad relationship, the relationship was abysmal. And the bottom line, the reason for this was they realized they added nothing but owned the license. And to be very clear, because I don't want to miss, Mark by that time was not part of Universal. No. Mark Cerny, as far as I'm concerned, he was always the N+1 Naughty Dog. I don't include him in that in any way. But beyond that, there was no value we were getting, and they were openly hostile to us. Our offices were being built as they were doing this. So it wasn't that we were asking them to do something that they shouldn't have done. They had a obligation to house us that was in the contract, and they realized that they could put us in the hall on the 34th floor and, do all these things. So, there could be a movie about this. It was a crazy time. It was a crazy time.
So although it was hard to say goodbye to Crash, but not say goodbye to this.
Right. It was not hard to say goodbye to Universal, but the fact that CTR even existed was Sony stepping up to the plate and doing the right thing by all of the parties, and it wasn't going to happen again. To jump off that, Crash Bandicoot Universal. About a month ago, I took my daughter to Universal City Walk. I live in LA, and we went to a comic book store that had Sonic comics in it, and then we went to what's it called? It's a mall store, Hot Topic, and they had a bunch of Sonic stuff all over the place. And then we went down the strip, and there was a Nintendo store. And as most of you know, there's a big Mario theme park thing. I built Crash with Andy and Mark 500 yards from that point, and they are borrowing the other IP now, when Crash was bigger than both of those for 5 years running. And that's crazy to me. Had the relationship worked out better, there might be a Crash ride at Universal. They would have the Crash IP, and Crash would be what Crash was, but they just didn't see it.
The first Jak and Daxter was a great game, a real evolution of what you'd done at Crash. But the second game was notably more edgy. There was guns, there was attitude. What prompted that?
Well, the world changed. So stepping back a bit, Naughty Dog's goal with Crash was to merge story and game in a way that would blend seamlessly. We utterly failed on the story because we ran out of time and the hardware itself didn't allow us to do that. Jak pushed forward with that. But what happened simultaneously is Grand Theft Auto came out. You were talking about Grand Theft Auto today. Well, Grand Theft Auto mattered then too. GTA 3 came out, and all of a sudden the audience changed. I remember testing Jak and Daxter. We had a bunch of 8-year-olds in the room because that was the youngest audience we went to. And I had them sitting around the table, and I was like, so what'd you guys think? Well, it's pretty good, But, graphics are amazing. It's really good. But, I think it's probably for my younger brother. You're 8. Yeah. What are you into? GTA. And the world had just changed.
Yeah.
And what gamers wanted had just changed. And so we thought we should change. And Sony had invested a huge amount in Jack and Daxter and wanted to continue that investment, and also wanted to keep a broad number of titles that were on the shelf, including things for 8-year-olds should be playing. And so it was the right thing to do to continue Jack and Daxter, but we wanted to adopt whatever parts of GTA we could into that audience. And so, being the business-minded people we always were, looking at our competition, trying to find a hole, the idea was, let's take character action and bring in some of the elements of GTA. And that literally is what Jack and Daxter 2 was trying to solve, the problem it was trying to solve.
It's interesting because I said to you earlier, one of my first jobs in the video games industry was testing, and I tested the first Uncharted. I remember thinking, this is very different for a Naughty Dog game. But actually, I can see the journey now.
Uncharted was adult, photorealistic. Those changes were probably driven by GTA. But other than that, that was the game we wanted to make. It was a linear story with you in control.
I asked everyone I spoke to for stories about you, and Shuei brought up the Tara Reid talk at DICE 2004. And this talk, if you can feel the anger, if you don't know it, it's around game developers being disrespected by the industry in a million ways, not having logos on the box, not being invited to their own parties, unlike Hollywood where talent was the center. And then you said this, which caused Shuei a lot of problems. PR and marketing departments in our industry are not the power. 2 planes take off. One has the entire PR and marketing department in the industry in it. The other one has the entire product development in it. PR and marketing department plane goes down. Products end up on the shelves a few months late. The development plane goes down. I think it's a decade before we get good games again. Shuei was laughing when he was recounting this, and there was a lot of angry PlayStation people coming off that.
Yes. So, as you can tell, I'm very passionate, and I say things that sometimes are stronger worded than the intention. And that was one of the cases where I probably should have looked into the language. What I meant was, at the time, game industry was changing from kids are playing games to adults are playing games. Mm-hmm. And that change brought a different way of marketing and perceiving things, and a different kind of way of doing things. Mm-hmm. And what the industry was doing at the time was trying to focus on the product as opposed to focus on the developer. And I felt this was DICE was a developer conference, remember? Yeah. That developers were the value. In the same way that movie makers are the value, developers are the value. Vince is the value, right? Like these people are the value because they're the ones whose vision is making the thing important. It was all fine until the publishers started simultaneously, and I was also at the time on the IGDA board, started trying to, there was a moment where there was a wrestling match, and the question was, were developers going to have any place at the table? And to give you an example, there were companies that were sending people to DICE at the time, and GDC, who were not allowing the people from their companies' names to be put on the screens as they were speaking, just their title and their company they were working with, because they didn't want the people to be the power or the import. Likewise, there were Hollywood parties that were being thrown because the rest of the world was looking at the game industry, and developers were not getting invited to their own launch parties. Yeah. And yet the marketing, the PR departments, et cetera, they were sending all of their staff to these parties. And my point was, developers are important. If you look at the import of them in the industry versus the people, and it was specifically about parties. I mean, we're cutting out all the other slides. Yeah. What's the difference here between losing one or the other? Yeah. It was not suggesting that anyone should be harmed in any way. That was never, right? It wasn't a plane should go down. It was, were this to happen, where is the value in this industry? And I put it in front of this room, and I have held this belief for the entire time. It is that talent making the games that is touching people that is the value here, in the same way that it is in film and in the same way it is in music. It's not that distribution isn't important. It's not that the hardware isn't important. It's not that it is that was important. And that was a long-winded way of explaining why what is easily quotable as I wanted to harm the marketing department. Absolutely never that.
Do you think the power balance is right now?
I think it's shifted over time, and I think it's gone in different directions. I think it's better than it was at that point, for sure.
Yeah.
That was a moment in the industry where the industry was on a pivot, and I wanted to stand up for the development community.
Yeah.
I think it depends on what part of the business you're looking at. Is it a indie title? Is it self-published on Steam? Is it a large publisher? Is it a well-known IP? Is it not a well-known IP? I think the industry has changed in such a way that the question is almost not as relevant anymore. Yeah. But at that time, almost every game was a console or PC game made by a single developer and released in that same way.
So it's 2004. You're getting on a bit now. You're the ripe old age of 34. You're a leader of a studio in the most powerful games organization in the world. Why leave?
I was burnt out too. The idea that you would release a game like Crash Bandicoot and it would be, they said 5 million units. We ended up selling 9, of Crash 1. And at the time, that was incredible. And then 1 year later, you would release its sequel, not with another team doing it, the same people. And then 1 year later, you would release its sequel. And then 1 year later, you would release an entirely new engine with an entirely new, mechanic. And then you have your next title. There were years where my computer, at the time the computers were tracking our time in office. There were years where I didn't leave the office except for a day I had the flu, one day.
Oh, yeah.
And I was just burnt out. And as Andy said, we had incredible talent and at Naughty Dog, and we didn't rage quit. We announced we were going to transition and spent 2 years on that transition before the day we left. So for 2 years, Evan went from not being in charge of the company to being in charge of the company slowly in a linear way, so that it was a completely natural transition.
So we've come to the end of the Naughty Dog story, but nowhere near the end of the Jason Rubin story. The next 20 years would feature startups, an attempt to save a beloved publisher, and the return of virtual reality. Here is the third part of your story.
And I had met them both when I was at Activision. I worked for Mitch Lasky in business development. And after Crash came out, we said, we got to meet these guys. We got to be in business with them somehow. The funny story around that is, of course, they were on the Universal lot, so it was not possible to just show up at their office. I remember just being in a staff meeting and saying, hey, we need to get in touch with these guys, and I don't know how to do it. And this woman raised her hand and says, I went on a date with Jason Rubin once. I think I have his cell phone. I said, great. So I just called him, and I think his first response was, how'd you get my cell phone number? And I said, it's a long story. And then Jason and I had a startup with some of our Flector colleagues that Andy was actually focused on opening a restaurant at that point, and he opted out of.
The way that I understood it was they had been brought in to lead the company forward, and then they had kind of unearthed that the company was in a much worse financial position than they knew when they were coming in.
My memory of that time and how I've described to other people is a little bit like being in one of those airplane disaster movies from the 1970s, where like the flight attendant says, is there a doctor on the plane? And I sort of naively rang my call button, and then you come up to the cockpit and they're like, well, the pilots are dead. The plane is running out of fuel. There's a bomb on board. Do you know how to fly a plane?
We were in one of these meetings, and Trey was really quiet, and we went through all of our, administrative things or whatever. And then he goes, okay, so I had this great idea. We're totally redoing the fight mechanic. And we're going to change it all, and it's going to be a fart mechanic. Almost every meeting, it was like, I had this great idea, and I'm going to completely blow up the schedule.
Given that it was in a much worse state than I think even people realized or were willing to admit internally, I feel good that we preserved a large number of jobs.
Jason and I had like 4 businesses together before he settled in at Meta for a long stretch.
What we started with was we cast a really wide net. We signed a bunch of small games with a big roster of developers, and the strategy was, let's do lots of experiments. None of these have to be full-size proper games. We're just trying to learn about what the mechanics are that make sense and what's special in VR. And one of those early experiments was a game from Crytek called The Climb. And every VR game today that has climbing as a mechanic, which is an obvious natural thing to put in your game, they really owe Crytek and The Climb for paving the way there and proving that out. And that's what we were doing under Jason. We had dozens of games going at once across all different genres, and we were experimenting. It was a great time.
I gave him a call and said, hey, Jason, we've been talking about virtual reality out here. We now have a fairly large team that is ready to move on to something different. What do you think? Jason flew down, I think it might have been the next day, to hear pitches that we had for the Oculus platform, and he was fantastic. And because of our long relationship, I think there was a lot of mutual trust there, and he said, let's go for it. But the Oculus games, working with Jason was crucial to our survival within the industry and our later success. I consider him one of my best friends in the industry.
I mean, we were friends since we were 12, and we were roommates for like 10 years. I mean, and worked together. So it's very much like a brother relationship.
For me, this whole experience, it was like being Ron Wood in the Rolling Stones. Like, I never had to be Keith Richards or Mick Jagger. Like, that was Andy and Jason. But it's pretty good to be Ron Wood, too.
He tells the truth. I mean, that's what's wonderful about Jason. He gets right to the heart of any matter, and he just tells you the truth. And that's, to me, why one of the reasons he has been so successful in the games industry and beyond the games industry. People love working with him. He's got such natural charisma, and they respect him, right? Because he's just salt of the earth kind of guy.
Wow. Keep the lights down. I want to show my tears.
We didn't fit it in there, but other Jason described your relationship with Andy as being like Kirk and Scotty. I don't know what he meant by that, but...
Andy and I have been a perfect pair in every company we've worked on together. I'm 56. I'm at the point where I'm starting to think, do I have regrets in life? One regret I have in life is I didn't spend more time with more companies with Andy. Like there have been periods I haven't, and I should have.
No. Well, it feels odd to go back through that story, but I interviewed you just as the THQ auction happened, I think. And I didn't really appreciate at the time how close you were to saving the entire organization. There was a stalking horse bid that could have kept THQ together. Even though most of those studios ended up somewhere good, at least for a while, it must have been pretty heartbreaking that you were so close.
Yeah, that was hard. Jason and I had gone through an attempted acquisition of a major publisher that was in very good shape with a private equity company. It was the second large publisher private equity takeover that I had kind of been involved in, both of which didn't go through. And so the private equity company, when it fell through, they said, well, is there anything else out there? Because this one we can't get to a price agreement with the current owner. Is there anything else out there? And I was like, I'm not sure. And they're like, what about THQ? And I was like, well, this one is doing incredibly well. THQ has a market capitalization in the stock market of $25 million right now. That was a multi-billion-dollar company. And they were like, well, you should just look at it. And I went in and I looked at the company, and again, go back to the teams, the developers. There was so much talent, and they were working on that South Park game, which ended up, I think, tripling our rosy prediction for it when it finally came out. Just had wonderful, wonderful teams, 4A.
Yeah.
And they had already gone through a pretty significant process of reducing the stuff that wasn't working. So the private equity company we went in with, this was too small for them. So another group came in, another bunch of investment bankers. And we looked at it, and it was way undervalued. And it's complicated because it sounds like $25 million. You're not buying $25 million a company. There's debt that has to be paid off. There are these obligations here. There's, international distribution of money. This stuff gets very complicated. But it looked like a good deal. And so we went in, and then we saw the part of this stuff that they didn't even understand was going on internally. And it was bad. Like the plane analogy is the one that we used at the time. We went in thinking we would take the plane down. It's definitely doing poorly, but we pull back on the stick. The wheels would touch, but we would be able to do this. And if we could do that, man, we had the right products and the right plan and everything else. But it turned out we had half the fuel we thought, we're having half the altitude and traveling 3 times as fast down, and the pilot was dead. And so like the whole thing was really rough. And 8 months later, it had sold off its parts.
Yeah. Well, I won't even bring up U-Draw. I interviewed. Oddly though, hearing stories about that short period, I was struck by. I picture you firefighting and sort of dealing with a losing battle, but then I hear the ones like Trey Parker, Matt Stone, and the fart mechanic, or of you going to Ukraine and meeting 4A and getting desk chairs for everybody.
I tried. They couldn't get the desk chairs, but yes, I tried.
Oh, you tried to get desk chairs. Oh my goodness.
They were working at card tables with, the kind of chairs you have for an outdoor wedding. I don't know how to explain them, but they're metal and you open them up. Developer hours. And I just looked at that and I was like, we can't have this team doing that. We have to get you chairs. And then it turned out you couldn't get Aeron chairs and the like in Ukraine at that time. And getting it over the border, there was bribery issues and other stuff. And it was a mess. It was a mess. But visiting 4A was amazing. Again, the people were there. The talent was there.
So I was going to say, maybe this isn't the right word, but it seems like there were quite a lot of fun times during that period too.
There absolutely were fun times. It was just, there's Matt and Trey, and they had worked for, I think, 2 years at that point. And I asked, how long do you think this game will be? It was pretty linear, about 20 hours. Okay, best I can tell you of 9 minutes. And there was just silence in the room. And I think Matt is a mathematician by training. He did the math on that. He's like, oh boy. I'm like, how many scripts worth is this to get to the full thing? Because it's narrative driven. So they know it's this amount of script per minute. So we think it's this number of scripts. Again, Matt is very good at math. I'm like, okay, how long is a script for one of your shows? Okay, it's 2.5 seasons. Okay, I'll give you a month and a half to write that because I can't take this any longer. THQ doesn't have the money. Well, we're doing this Book of Mormon thing right now. You're seeing them actually rehearse behind us as we're talking about this. Yeah, I get that. You got a month and a half. They did it.
Wow. Well, let's move on quickly. I'm conscious of the time. I remember when you joined Oculus and you entered the world of VR, you believed this was the future. You were adamant this is where things were heading. But did that belief ever waver over the 12 years?
Well, clearly we never quite got there in the time I was at Meta. And so I don't want to discount the future. We had a 3-part problem. We had the price of the device, we had the hardware capabilities, and then we had a content problem. And those 3 things had to come together. Price we played with very easily because we could, subsidize the hardware. Getting the content ended up being the hard thing because you did a hardware leap. Now you needed new content because the hardware had different functionality. So every time we upped the hardware quality, we would have to rewrite the code and rewrite all the content. And we never quite got there. I believe that immersive will be the future. I think it'll probably come through AR before it comes through VR. Stepping back a second, there was a belief that there was going to be VR, then AR, then AI would empower all of them. That, as I entered Meta, that was the belief. VR took longer than we thought. Let's just put it that way. AR and AI came a lot quicker. And so I think what you're seeing is the industry say we don't need the VR stepping stone right now, and heading more towards, Apple has certainly made this decision. We're going to head towards augmented reality glasses that let you see through, and the AI that powers it is what makes it interesting now, because the screens themselves are not good.
What was it like working with Mark Zuckerberg? I mean, I know you kept producing these manifestos or presentations for him on where you thought things were heading or where we should go. It did seem for a while at least like it was fully bought in on the dream.
Yeah. First of all, I love Mark. I loved working at Meta. I love the people there. I left because I didn't feel that what they were working at the time was interesting to me. And as you can see from the way this goes, I've done that multiple times in my career. Were wonderful things that I truly enjoyed, like Naughty Dog, just weren't what I had a passion for in the moment. That's a super strength or a super weakness of mine, depending on which era of my life you look at. But I do tend to change things. I loved working with Mark. I think, this is a game business. So let's talk about the business for a second. When I read the press, and this is mostly not the game press, this is the broader press, saying the metaverse failed. Whoa. Look at Matthew Ball and his take on and what he said about Roblox and what Roblox is doing to the business that we are discussing here today and how much that has become the business. The growth right now of the business is quite a lot of it is Roblox. If you look at the most concurrent users, I think of the top 5, 3 of the games, and the top 10, 8 of the game, whatever it is, are Roblox. Roblox is a metaverse. Mark was right about the metaverse. Was he right about VR as part of the metaverse? That one I think is a little bigger a stretch, but the metaverse itself was important. And if you look at this as a social media company, my daughter is not that interested right now in texting she texts her friends, but it's mostly to get into Roblox. My 12-year-old's not that interested in Instagram. She's not that interested in video. And if you think of where that's going, I think Roblox is going to be a greater and greater percentage of their future. So as a social media company looking at that, I think you got it all right. Where we failed was the actual implementation. We didn't implement. But he's right about the business.
I'll ask a couple more questions before we wrap up.
Sure.
And one is, out of the career you've had so far, what has been your proudest achievement?
That's a hard one. As I said, the thing that ends up mattering to me is touching somebody in such a way that it is very obvious that I have made a positive difference in their life. I like providing joy. Yeah. And I think I've done that at multiple times in multiple ways. The question then is scale relevant to me? In which case, obviously, the early Naughty Dog career would be the point at which I had the most people reacting to that. But there were moments at Meta watching people use VR and lose themselves and be truly immersed and take off the headset and be like, holy shit, that was unique. I've never done something like that. There were moments at Flector where people were able to mash up video, and that was acquired by MySpace, by the way. It wasn't said there, and I worked at MySpace for 8 months. That much smaller audience because we had just launched, but there were moments where that mattered. Like, it's hard to say what that moment is. It's every time somebody comes back and say, you made a difference in my life with something you worked on. And I've been lucky. There's been a lot of that.
Out of all of these industry legend interviews that I've done, you're by far the youngest.
Is that right?
Yeah. So what's next? Well, I've had Peter Moore, I've had Reggie. We've got Ken Kutaragi coming on later in the year. So what's next for Jason Rubin?
That's a really good question. I didn't leave Meta because I had something I really wanted to do. I left because the things that are being worked on right now didn't speak to my personal passions. Mm-hmm. Not that they're wrong. I actually think they're the right things for them to work on. They didn't speak to my personal passions. And I had intended to go do a lot of photography. Wildlife photography is probably the one thing I do in my life where my brain can be empty, and that's not a problem. But that's hard when you have kids and the like. So I started messing around with Claude Code, messed around with, some of the movie and video generation, messed around with, I know there's a lot of diciness around AI right now. but I think it's going to enable things that haven't been enabled in the past. And in so much as those things touch people. And that's the most important thing. Someone has, at the end of the day, is AI valuable? Is AI generation good or bad? The answer to that question will be not the industry, not philosophy. It will be a user saying, that touched me. That was valuable. And if someone can use AI to create that moment, awesome. If AI cannot create that moment, it will kill itself because there's no market reason for anyone to use it. And I think that is the most important thing to realize. And there's bits of that have gotten me excited. I do not want to downplay the economic consequences of AI. That I find separate to, is AI a good thing to use? You asked earlier, will AI accelerate development? The answer to that question is actually a market question to answer. Yes, no. It will for some developers who choose to use it for that. It won't for other developers who instead want to spend the same amount of money or the same amount of time to do more. And another set of developers will decide not to touch it at all. And if all three of them find markets, then the answer, it will do all of the above. If one or the other of those doesn't find a market, that answers the question. Does a user at the end of it, does a gamer say, this is good? That's what matters.
Still got opinions on the industry. You're not giving up. Jason, thank you for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure. So that's it for today's episode of the Game Business Show. Thank you for joining us. If you like that and enjoyed the format, let us know. We'd actually love to do more of them. We will be back with more news, analysis, insight and interviews in the days and weeks ahead. But until next time, thank you for tuning in.